I'll take this time to tell you a little bit about my art practice. And what can I say that isn't obvious when you look at my work? I'm interested in showing, maybe I'll start how I got to this place. So, how I arrived at making this work that often is based on the interactions that I have with people outside of my community or who we don't really know each other. So basically strangers, um, is that I was very shy, but I was having these experiences where, because I'm of mixed identity, and I was sort of racialized through the questions that people would ask me on the street, like about my accent or my hair, and they would just come up to me, random people, but not necessarily want to get to know me. So I thought, how can I change these experiences? Because they're a little bit uncomfortable when someone comes up to you, asks you a question, and then runs away. So I was always like, how can I make this interaction deeper and where we actually get to know something about each other? Because it was unfair. They got to ask me questions, but I didn't get to ask them questions really. It was almost like I was this weird specimen that they just got to take something from. And so the first person I ever really worked with one on one was someone I met at a community gym. And it took me about 3 months to ask him just to be part of this animation project. And I wanted to get people to talk to me about their culture. So I thought, he looks like he's from somewhere else. And I thought, okay. And I kept calling my best friend and saying, I found the person, I found the person. But I was just too shy, just too introverted to imagine having to talk to this person. And finally, because we saw each other all the time at this little community gym, I asked him, do you want to meet with me just for 45 minutes or so over tea, and I'll ask you some questions and then make an animation? So, I mean, this was years ago. And it ended up being that he just said yes. And it wasn't just that 145 minutes, but over and over we met. On, not that we collaborated for that long, but we had sort of 9 years of talking to each other. And so just the fact by that that person said yes made me ask someone else. So someone else I saw at a library all the time reading a book, and then another person who I met who just walked into someone else's studio who I shared. So I just got a little bit more confidence, even though it's always really scary for me to work with someone new. Um, but I like that challenge, and it's proven to be really rewarding. And usually we talk and talk, and then I go home and I write everything down that we've said. And from there, I would make these drawings and then maybe show the person, or maybe I would just draw and write and then show them at the end. Or sometimes I wouldn't show them anything until it was exhibited, um, the work itself that I made from them. And usually people were pretty pleased and just happy to have had that wall where, you know how artists seem kind of their secret in their studio? Well, they would get to either hang out in my studio or I'd get to go to their home. And so we just became closer somehow, because I think that was my initial complaint in my head, is that I didn't like that as humans we didn't feel this sense of responsibility when we interacted with strangers on the street or out in public. So I've been doing this work for years, maybe since 2004, maybe before then. Um, and it's not really work that's work, it's just almost part of my day-to-day experience, always just trying to be really curious about people. Um, and I love drawing and I love writing, but I'm not good at either one of them. So they're sort of just figuring things out, and I'm not putting myself down, but they're figuring out how words create images and how they're really connected. Um, and the process of making is sort of beautiful when you're making work about someone. So I'm trying to honor our time together and represent that visually so that other people can look at it and feel a connection with it. But the reason I say it's a nice experience or this beautiful experience is that you are reliving your time together with someone who may not be there in front of you anymore. So if I did a residency, an artist residency really far away, I would still, now back in Canada, be able to think about them and our time together. So it's almost like extending the relationship or the time that we had talking to even deeper level because I'd have to think about them even more as I try to draw something from their stories. And I used to be very interested in portraits, and I still see all of my installations or animations, as complex and multi-layered as they are, as just a portrait, but like a story of a person. So it can look very not like a portrait. They may be no faces, and maybe something kind of abstract looking. And I use many kinds of drawing processes, from changing up my media. Behind me, I have some students that I taught where we all use different mark making tools to make drawings. So there are their tools. So I do that sometimes myself. It's just kind of fun to mix things up. But I always want to try and work with different aesthetics that make it exciting. And at the same time, while I'm working on this work, so just sort of dealing with material handling, I'm constantly thinking about that person, and that's where I take these breaks and write about them even more, so expand the writing even more. So at first the writing became stories, and then they became sort of couplets or rhyming poems. Now, I'll confess I'm not a writer at all, so that part of it, the challenge, I really love. And I would sometimes write something, this is really embarrassing, and get other people to read it and then record them and have them, their voices in installations or in exhibitions. I don't necessarily want to use my own voice. It was more interesting to see how they interpreted the writing of someone that was very sort of personal and about someone they'd never met. So again, it was kind of like another layer of they were a stranger to the what was written and they had to try and understand something. So yeah, writing and drawing, and um, the other part is, I guess people always ask me, do you keep up the relationships or the connections with every participant well I've ever spoken to? And I often do. If I show the work again, I always write them an email and say, hey, so happy that we had that time together, even though it was 4 years ago, or I haven't forgotten you, or I just wanted to let you know that this work is brought alive again and it made me think of you, and just reconnecting. And other times I just have really deep friendships with people that, this process, it's hard for me to not make work about people because it's, well, we're social beings, and I think it's just nice to feel that there's some way of trying to connect or just be in the world that is not about signing contracts or not about obligations or even thinking about a responsibility, but just a genuine curiosity in people. And then not always do we connect, but how to honor just our time together to at least attempt to be close or connect through these creative processes. So I guess it's a way of using creative processes like writing or recording, like voice, and definitely images to try and retell something where there was a transformation that happened. So we were no longer so distant. We didn't feel, oh, no one really wants to get to know me. We actually became closer, even if it was just very fleeting and temporary. And that makes, I think that's what's interesting and that keeps me focused and grounded in people and just the way I am in the world. So I think that's all I'm going to say about my artwork for now. Um, I hope that gives you a good sense, a good overview of the sort of work I make. The themes are really, I mean, I am interested in people's personal sort of struggles and the complicated layers that make them who they are. And the reason I'm interested in the struggles is because it's just more fascinating to work through, see how people work through things. We all need help from each other in that way. Um, so it's difficult for me to say, I'm not going to make work where I involve other people anymore because they really shape the topics or the ideas that come into my work. So I'm sort of eternally grateful for them for taking the time, for never signing contracts with me, but just trusting in me that this time together is worth something and that we'll do something creative together. And usually it goes very well.